For me, this podcast is about honouring the women who've walked before us and learning from their wisdom. Today's conversation is with a true Australian trailblazer, Wendy McCarthy AC. From country beginnings to the national stage, Wendy's life has been defined by courage, vision, and the unwavering commitment to education, equity, and public service. For more than 5 decades, she's championed the rights of women and girls, shaping conversations around fairness, leadership, and opportunity. A founding member of the Women's Electoral Lobby, Wendy helped pave the way for equal access to education, pay equality, and reproductive rights here in Australia. Her leadership journey has taken her from the classroom to the boardroom. As Deputy Chair of the ABC, Chair of Plan Australia, Headspace and Circus Oz, and as Chancellor of the University of Canberra. Recognised as a Companion of the Order of Australia and the recipient of multiple awards, including the 2025 Future Women Trailblazer Award. Yes, she's a bloody legend as far as I'm concerned. Wendy continues to inspire generations to lead from both the heart and the head. She's also authored her book, Don't Be Too Polite, Girls, which I loved, a powerful memoir encouraging women to trust their voices and take up space. Yes, take up space. Wendy McCarthy's story isn't just about her. It's about how her generation of women have helped change Australia. And I'm so grateful to get to speak to Wendy today. I want to start by saying, welcome, Wendy. I'm honestly starstruck, if that's the word, awestruck. You are I'm a 64-year-old woman who rides off the back of courageous women like yourself. So thank you for being here. You have such wisdom to share.
Pleasure. And I can't think of anything nicer than people riding off anything I've left behind or still carry.
You've got so much to share. So let's jump straight in. You have spent an absolute lifetime challenging systems that weren't built for women. And when you took those risks, or when you take those risks, how do you decide when to push, when to pause, and when to pivot? Because I'm a bit of a Taurus and I tend to just push sometimes. How do you have that wisdom what to do?
I thought that was a really interesting question to consider. And how do I know? I always follow my gut. And in the places, and sometimes, of course, I had no indication that it was dangerous because I thought it was reasonable.
Yep.
So there are two perceptions of things, the person who's pushing and the person who's pushing back. And if I didn't know that there was a bank or an accounting firm or a doctor's professional service or something behind them, I just would have kept pushing. And if I'd known it, I probably still would have kept pushing, because if I think something's fair and I know there's groups of people behind me who have longed to do some of the things that I've pushed through, many people before have taken incremental steps to get there. And sometimes I've been pulled in to do what they think I'm good at. I mean, the abortion campaign's a good one, the reproductive right. Followed that for over 50 years. And in part it was because I'd once had an abortion, an illegal abortion. And I didn't disclose it for a long time. And when I did, I realised that shame can bury you. And the fear of speaking out. I mean, I was already, it was in the 70s. So I was already, a 30-year-old woman. But before I really disclosed it, I didn't even tell, doctors when I went for appointment to ask if there was any blah, blah, if I'd ever had that. So that tells you how deeply the shame is. So those are the things that influenced me and enraged me. And I had to learn to manage that rage and channel it in a way that everything seemed normal if you changed it. And the question I would constantly ask is, why not? Why would you not do this? What's the reason? And so if you had a man standing in front of you who maybe was a rule keeper in the public sector, he would start to say, well, because that's how it is. Well, there I go. That's my opportunity. It doesn't have to be that way. And the people who are the primary people in this story are the women, the man, if he wishes to be, and often they don't, and the child that may or may not survive the process. And it's not a child then, and well, mostly not. So I think it's just learning, and the other question is, what could you really do to me? You know, what are the consequences of saying no? So teach yourself to learn to accept no. You might then decide you're not really accepting it, you're just going away to find a better way in, but at least you'll understand where the opposition comes from. And you know, most of the things that I've done aren't that clever. They just needed to be done, and someone needed to see it and feel it. And feeling it and learning not to be ashamed of doing something that someone else had defined as a crime. I mean, and when we were in that campaign at the end, 4 years ago, we'd already found some women in the western suburbs of Sydney queued up in hospitals to have terminations and being told that they were at risk of going to jail because it was still on the criminal list. Well, that's just incendiary for me.
Yeah.
So out of that you get bravery. But out the bravery also comes from the power of the group. So if you know, leadership's a funny thing, but you can't be a leader without followers. So you can stand out there in, you know, the front of the Navy or something and say, I'm the leader of the Navy, and everyone else is sticking their finger up or saying, you know, you're not really, you're just the minister. Or, you know, the head of command. But the truth is, nobody will follow you for very long if they don't believe in you. And that equation between leadership and followers, so everyone can be a leader. You can be a leader in the community. You can say, I don't like the way the supermarket's serving that, let's do something about it. And every time you do that, there's an incremental step of confidence if you win. And if you lose, saying, okay, I lost that one, so we'll have to find another way to do it if it's important enough. That's a very long-winded answer, but it is, in a sense, defines most of what I've done.
I love it. I've always said that they have to feel us to follow us. You can give anyone the title, here you are.
That's right. That's right.
Queen of the world or whatever. But if there's no connection, yeah.
And with that, and just watching 7.5 million people, I lived in America for a year and a bit, and just out on the streets.
Last weekend?
It doesn't mean the world will change. It means people are planning changes. When they go out in the street, and I mostly believe you can't be a citizen who works on change unless you felt the pavement underneath your feet.
Yep.
And 7.5 million people is a lot of people.
Yeah, agree. When Jane Goodall died a couple of weeks ago, I know, it broke my heart, but I actually found peace in some wisdom she shared, and that was that she sees life, or saw life, as a jigsaw. And we all have to do our piece, because it's like, who am I to think that I can help women of the world?
Yeah.
Well, I can, because if I do my piece and you do your piece and everyone does their piece, we've got the jigsaw and we've got the change.
That's right.
If we keep thinking, I'm just a piece, who am I to do it? We don't get change.
And don't you see all that in her face?
Oh.
And then what I loved was that when she was asked what was her favourite creature, she said a dog.
Dog.
Oh, that was my moment for my dog to rush out and say, I'm here for you.
So good. All right. Tell me, I'm curious, because you've often said that separating personal from the political, like you say we can't. How does that lens shape the choices you've made? Because a lot of women hold themselves back and they do that. I don't want to be political, but I want this change in the world. How can women today use that to lead change in their own worlds?
I think I've always said that I'm a personal political person, and I look at politics in a personal way. It might be about how it affects my community, it might be how it affects me, it might be the world of politics. And I do look at that a lot at the moment and see where world patterns are happening, because there's a knock-on effect all around the world. But it's the personal that will drive you past the political statement that has come out from somewhere. So I'm not going to waste my time on things I don't care about. I might sign a petition or something, which might be 6 on my list of most important things to do this year, and I'll stand beside that, but it doesn't mean I'm particularly moved. Coming back to personal political, it is the personal things that restrain us from being political in various parts of our lives. So if you have a deep feeling as a religious person that birth control is a bad thing and against nature and religion and so on, you won't come and join the political marches. You won't sign the petition. But you may understand on the spectrum where that stuff fits. For me, it had been a personal issue, and that was the attitude of doctors. Just to recap a bit, I think personal political is the combination of what creates change for women. We're driven by personal necessities. I mean, for me, it's about women ageing and the discrimination that they're suffering. And if I knew what I knew now about that, I would have been much more conscious and active in creating wealth for myself. Well, wealth, yes, money. But I just was one of the lucky people who was married to a fabulous man who just assumed that I could do anything I want and he could do anything he want, but he was better at money than me. Now that I have to do it all, he may not have been better at money than me, but at least I had 45 years of him doing that and knowing that we were all safe. Now I would have to say that adding to what a young woman should deal with when she's thinking about her life, and most of us don't plan, the truth is, but you need to think more than health and education now. You need to think finance. You need to think money. You cannot afford, and so many women will have children without a partner, a visible partner. You can't really assume that you can live in today's world without access to some form of financial flow, really, and whether you want to own a house or whatever. But you can't really raise a child without money. You can't just live on government pensions because they're actually not good enough, and I think they're continually in danger. So the personal political will always drive change. And the other thing about things like the personal political, there are a lot of things you want to share with women that you don't want to share with men. They're not that interested, and we're not that interested in what they think. Let's face it. We don't have to prance around looking for their approval. We need to find good women who think the same as us, because that by definition will think they're good, and we'll get on with the changes. And however that impacts them, that's a social and a political issue. So when you think that until 5 years ago, you could go to jail for having had an illegal abortion for 10 years, and so could the person who did the procedure. Now, men were once owned their wives, and in many parts of the world they still do, and they control it. So that personal lateral friendship, a lot of the friends who work with me in abortion and education are the people I work with in the 70s. The only thing that's aging is that we're a diminishing group.
Yeah.
It's a couple of my heroines like Joan Bielski and Edna Ryan. I mean, they're not with us anymore, but all their stories are here. And for me, actually, when I was writing my book, I loved writing that book because it was during COVID, and I put a lot of stories in there and things that the publisher suggested, put the referendum document in there because it'll be hard for people to find, but if they know that's in that book, it's much easier them saying, where's the statement, the Uluru Statement? And I'd be amazed how many people have rung up and said, I didn't know about the Uluru Statement until then. So I was sort of writing, all warts memoir, but I was also writing what I think is a social history of a feminist moving through the countryside and around the place. Yes.
Yeah, it's a historical document. I agree. And I think that I've only come recently to realize that the stories are the wisdom. It's how the wisdom gets shared.
Yes.
And it's
and often if you said to an average person, go and read a book about social document, they say no. But if they know the stories, they'll come back and look for the stories, and they're the
They
stories.
remember the stories.
Hop inside my stories, girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have not checked out the book yet by Wendy McCarthy, Don't Be Too Polite, girls, it's a must. I agree. You mentioned before about finances. It is crazy to me that in Australia today, it's women over 60 that are facing, it's the highest rate of homelessness. Like women over 60 are in trouble. I'm over 60. Like, how do you think we got here, and what's something bold that needs to shift for us to bring some serious change to that and fast?
Well, I think many of the women in that position felt, and I say this in the most generous way, that a man was a financial plan. And marriage was a way that their parents had navigated the world, in good marriages particularly, and that as long as they were good partners and good mothers and good wives, that was enough. And to see the fallout of women, especially in rural areas, I notice, who'd been trained as doctors and nurses and so on. Sometimes the nurses went back to work, but rarely the doctors. And they were seen as, that was seen as a really good marriage in many. So I can think of a couple where the male became an accountant, and the woman, often they knew each other in the village or in the town, became the doctor, and after the first baby she didn't work. And you think of the waste of money and time on our society for that. But there was no sense of any reciprocity or social responsibility. At least with teachers you had a bond. And I learned that, and the thing about learning it was I had a 5-year bond, or I had to pay $500, or £500 it was. And that's quite a lot of money in today's money if I broke it. And, the bond was 5 years. But as a woman, if I broke it after 3 to be married, I didn't have to pay back. Now, I thought that was marvellous as a young woman. But when I've reflected, when I came back after living and working overseas for a few years, I realised actually it was another trap, because I came back, I couldn't get a job, could only get casual work. The seniority, despite the fact that I'd worked consistently in 2 nations, it didn't count. So I was back at starting point unless I went casual, which means I could never have moved up the system. So the women who stayed and didn't marry and so on, the bar had been lifted just before I went, but not in the public sector. So you could have worked for 25 years and not get the benefits of it. So that's why there were so many male principals. And it wasn't until, probably a decade or so more that women started moving up the ranks in terms of positions of responsibility and learning to shape systems. So from a personal decision, being educated, being married, and seeming to have the whole world saying, what a good girl, actually, good girls didn't get the corner office, and good girls didn't get the principal's room or chair. And we didn't see through that. But once we learnt it, that's when personal became political again, and it works.
How do you hold hope? And if you want to give wisdom to us women coming behind you, how did you hold hope in the face, of everything that's going on, and not burn out in your life of activism?
Well, I think that's why we do need to look after our health. I mean, it's hard to imagine at my stage in life that menopause can now be a discussion in Parliament.
Yeah.
I mean, what an achievement. Not that I'm that fussed about the blokes talking about it, to be frank, because it's,
You're thinking they're experts at it.
Oh, they're so good at it, yes, I know.
Come on.
But at least it gives it a status which removes it from being some silly thing that women are fussing about, but as something that has an impact on productivity, the capacity for women to stay there and to have some exceptions. Until then, men just didn't want to know it. And I suspect if we looked at it, that many of the marriages that break up during menopause. And, because we lose our pathways of being together. And I think for older women, often it's when men get prostate cancer. And they get a bit tired of looking after them. I'm sure you get 100 calls saying they don't, but my observation is that it's a very big thing for a woman to take on looking after a man. And I think, when I look back now, I think that managing our health, and most women wouldn't have had super money. I've never had, I've had 2 super payments in my life, one for the ABC board, which was, I think, paid about $5,000 a year, or maybe 6, maybe even 10. But I didn't have super because that's not the pathway that I had. So when you break your career and you lose your super, these things have been fixed up. But they've been fixed up by the leadership of women.
Yeah.
Because we're the most impacted. So it's in our interest to be political about these things. And there are quite a lot of women running super funds, which is another really good thing. But it's, maternity leave. I didn't know anyone who went back to work after having a baby, and on full pay, because there was no maternity leave, and you couldn't hardly go back 4 days after you had a baby, which someone suggested to me if I wanted to go to work. It was one of those hissy moments, folks said, well, if you're a feminist, why don't you just go straight back to bed, put her into a crèche? And it was all that you could do, not just punch him.
They don't quite get what feminism is, do they?
No, and they don't get the generosity of belief that we include them in these discussions. And of course, to some extent, we had to get the power redistributed. But it's to their benefit to listen and realise we're not talking about purely personal indulgence. We're talking about personal self-management issues which have an impact on the economy. And now, of course, they're crying and they want all childcare to be about women going back to work. Well, actually, the child is at the centre of that story. I think we need to get that sorted out pretty quickly, and that's why I hang around the Parenthood and encourage the people who run that, and why I've been on the boards of Good Start. Children and health are really central.
They're our future. They have to be central.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. You've seen such an evolution of feminism in Australia. I'm like 20 years behind you or something, born in 61, and I remember the early 70s. They're my favorite time of my life. I was young, except I was so awake. It was in our news, everything, all the time, and women stepping up.
Where were you in the early 70s?
Well, I was born in 1961, so 10-year-old, 10, 11, 12.
Yes.
Impressionable years. I would have been so amongst it. And I swear I've never gotten out of that period, because it's like it's screamed at me since those days.
Yeah.
And I've always been looking for ways to take a stand for women and to just lift women up and just keep advancing us. And I remember when I learned about the suffragettes about 30 years ago, and I thought, these women were so courageous. Same as you
so
women
brave,
in the 70s.
yes.
Insane.
Yeah.
And young women don't know this history, which is, for me, is not cool. Part of me's doing a big part of me doing this podcast is that young women need to know this history, because they take so much for granted and won't fight for what needs to be still fought for, to carry that torch for the next woman.
And Jen, the part of that I find compelling is that they need to know that there's a lot of risk-taking involved, but it mostly ends well. You can do things I couldn't have done. You can earn income that I couldn't have earned. You can do, you can go to higher education. You can be the Governor General. All these things that you can do because a lot of courageous women changed the rules. And the simple things they asked in threatening and non-threatening ways is, why is this so? Why is it that only men can do this? And when you think about it, there's no good reason. And I used to ask that question when I used to do some work with the medical students at Sydney University about contraception and so on. I mean, there is no answer. You just stand there gobsmacked and think, well, no, well, just because it's always been like that, so it must be right. But that's a compelling thing for young women to have a look at. And when they do, and when you take them inside in a story, and when I'm talking to young women, that's what I always like to do, you know, so I hop into my shoes here. I'm not talking about myself to be vain. I'm just telling you that you can be here and you can say, I would have done that, Wendy, or I would have done this or whatever that. And you may have a better answer than I did at the time. If so, go and fix it. But what's the worst that someone can do? And I remember thinking, I went onto a board and I volunteered to be on the finance committee. And I was telling my husband when I went home, and he said, a bit risky, isn't it? And I said, I think I can read the balance sheet. And he said, but they might ask you to compose it. And I said, oh, that's all right, I'll hire someone. But, you know, it's like he was an economist and chartered accountant, so he knew all the rules and things, and he was an entrepreneur. And he had to think, what was he saying? Wow. What was he really asking me? Do you think you're up to looking at the big numbers? It was the ABC. Like they were big numbers. But no one else there had any more or less skill, and was going to be a learning thing. Well, why wouldn't I want to learn how to do that stuff?
Yeah.
There were always safety nets. You know, when the people take a risk on you, there's always a safety net. So, or usually a safety net. So take a risk, but not in matters of contraception.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wendy, we have to wrap up. I'm curious, what's the most important thing we haven't talked about yet that we should talk about today? What have I missed?
Oh, domestic violence.
Yeah.
I mean, domestic violence epitomises personal political. Politically, the men who bash, or I would say, if tested, this may not be the language, do you think you own your wife? And the answer would be yes. And if the answer is yes, I can do what I bloody well like to her. And they do. So it may not be rational, but instead of having a whole lot of other, you know, hugely abstract questions, why did he do this? Because he can. And because deep in his heart, she is his baggage. She is his to do what he wants with. And he might, when sober or, you know, think that's silly, but they would not be capable of doing it, the things they do to women. I mean, Australia's track record on domestic violence is shocking. And I don't go there very often because it triggers me a bit, because it was around alcohol and the bush and so on in my family, and where we lived in various times. And it never got to, you know, terrible positions like we are, but the assumption in shearing sheds and, you know, women who wanted to be shearers, they wore men's clothes until they were found out in order to shear, and they were very good at shearing. But there was always that little sense of violence that the, you know, shearing shed was quite a violent place for women unless she was bringing in the morning tea. And if you think about it and strip it down to the actual act, no man would really be bashing up a woman if he thought she had ownership of herself and independence. And, you know, I've always said, you know, the best love affairs are between people who are equal.
Yeah.
And I think, and of course, there's a lot of social media now which eggs that on. And I still have friends who say to me, you know, why don't we focus on men? I said, it's never worked. They have to do it for themselves. But what they're doing is the opposite of what we'd like them to do at the moment in many cases. They're just getting angrier and angrier. But there will be a time when it'll turn around. And those of us who've got, you know, broad arms and a long history will try and pick them up and say, okay, well, now you've tried your way, let's do it differently. And I'm hoping it will happen. Probably a long shot for my lifetime, but maybe not. Change can happen in a second.
It really can. And it takes enough of us doing our piece and using our voices, which is why I'm so passionate about helping women find and use their voices. Yes,
it's beautiful. So I'm very glad you're doing this podcast.
Well, thank you. You truly, I could cry happy just getting to talk to you. You've been a great inspiration to me.
Oh, thank you. That's so lovely.
Wendy, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self and give her one piece of wisdom with the wisdom that you own today, what would you tell her?
Keep your head and heart connected.
Yeah,
They're the two constraints, gateways. If it feels okay and you've done your homework, it is okay. But trust your gut and your heart, because we now know they're very connected.
absolutely. Thank you, Wendy
Thank you for
McCarthy.
having me.
Absolute pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.